What would you do if someone with authority publicly humiliated you, only for you to discover they were completely wrong? When a brilliant black student faced this exact situation with his arrogant math teacher, no one expected how dramatically their lives would change. Watch as intelligence triumphs over prejudice in a classroom showdown that will leave you speechless. This isn't just about a math error, it's about standing up for truth against all odds. Don't miss this incredible true-to-life story that's inspiring millions. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Johnson slid into his seat in the back row of Mrs. Eleanor Whitman's advanced calculus class, quietly arranging his perfectly organized notebook and two freshly sharpened pencils. Unlike most seniors at Westlake Preparatory Academy who inherited their spots through legacy admissions or parents' sizable donations, Marcus had earned his place through a competitive academic scholarship, one of only 3 black students in the entire senior class to do so. Mrs. Whitman strutted into the classroom, her pearl necklace clicking softly against her starched blouse. At 51, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had taught the children of senators, CEOs, and old money families for decades. Her reputation preceded her, brilliant but rigid, respected but feared. Today, we'll be exploring parametric equations and their applications, she announced, chalk tapping impatiently against the board. Her gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on Marcus before continuing. Let's see who completed the assigned reading. Marcus had not only completed the reading but had spent an extra 2 hours exploring additional applications. Math had always been his sanctuary, numbers followed rules that didn't change based on the color of your skin or the neighborhood you came from. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Whitman's voice cut through his thoughts. Since you seem so deeply contemplative today, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate how to solve this problem for the class. All 23 heads turned toward Marcus. Tyler Reynolds, whose father's name adorned the school's science building, smirked from the front row. Marcus approached the board, his heart pounding but hands steady. The problem was complex, intentionally so, but as he analyzed it, he recognized an elegant approach using a substitution method he'd read about in one of his grandfather's old engineering textbooks. As he worked through the solution, Mrs. Whitman's heels clicked against the linoleum, growing louder as she approached. Marcus wrote the final answer and stepped back. "What is this?" Mrs. Whitman's voice dripped with disdain. "This is not the method we discussed in class." "It's a different approach, Mrs. Whitman, but the answer is correct," Marcus explained quietly. "Different?" she scoffed. "Mr. Johnson, when I ask you to demonstrate a solution, I expect you to use the proper methods I've taught. Not whatever shortcut you've invented." "It's not a shortcut, ma'am. It's actually from..." "That's enough," Mrs. Whitman cut him off. "This is why following instructions is crucial. This kind of mathematical freelancing might work at your previous school, but at Westlake, we adhere to proven methodologies." Marcus felt heat rise to his face. His previous school had been one of the highest performing public schools in the state, where he'd ranked first in mathematics. Perhaps if you paid more attention in class instead of daydreaming, you might understand why the scholarship committee expects excellence, not improvisation, she added, turning to the class. This, students, is precisely what not to do. Laughter rippled through the room as Marcus returned to his seat, eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of 24 privileged stares burning into his back. "Now, Tyler," Mrs. Whitman smiled warmly, "would you please show the class the correct approach?" As Tyler strutted to the board, Marcus silently noted that both methods reached the same answer, only his required 3 fewer steps. "She had no right to treat you like that," Zoe fumed as she dropped her lunch tray beside Marcus in the cafeteria. As one of the few Asian scholarship students, Zoe had formed an immediate alliance with Marcus during freshman orientation. "Your solution was elegant. I checked it twice." Marcus pushed his food around, appetite gone. "It doesn't matter. You know Mrs. Whitman, her way or no way." "It does matter," Zoe insisted. "You should report her to Principal Harrington." Marcus shook his head. And say what? That she embarrassed me? That's not exactly against school policy. Across the cafeteria, Tyler and his friends were laughing, occasionally glancing toward Marcus. One mimicked writing on an imaginary board before dramatically crossing it out, triggering another round of laughter. Just 7 more months, Marcus murmured. 7 months, then MIT or Stanford, and none of this will matter. That evening, Marcus's grandfather found him surrounded by calculus books in their modest apartment. Rough day? Samuel Johnson asked, setting down his toolbox. At 72, he still worked part-time as a maintenance engineer, having retired from a distinguished career designing aircraft components, achievements that had never received proper recognition in the 1970s aerospace industry. Marcus recounted the classroom incident, his grandfather's expression darkening. You know what your grandmother would say, Samuel finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. They can take your dignity only if you give it to them. I know, Grandpa. I just... Marcus hesitated. Sometimes I wonder if I belong there. Listen to me, Samuel placed weathered hands on his grandson's shoulders. Your mind is extraordinary. Always has been. When you were 5, you were already solving problems meant for middle schoolers. You earned your place at that fancy school, and no one, especially not some teacher stuck in her ways, gets to make you doubt that. Later that night, Marcus tackled Mrs. Whitman's assigned project, a series of complex problems from chapter 17 of the textbook. Despite the day's humiliation, he found himself engrossed in the elegant dance of variables and functions. This was his element, where logic prevailed over prejudice. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, "Don't let her win. Show her what you can do." With renewed determination, Marcus doubled down on the assignment. Mrs. Whitman might control the classroom, but she couldn't diminish his passion for mathematics. He would complete this project so flawlessly that even she couldn't find fault with it. As the night deepened, Marcus worked problem after problem, his grandfather's words echoing in his mind. He wouldn't give up his dignity, or his unique approach to mathematics, for anyone. The digital clock on Marcus's desk blinked 1:37 a.m., but he barely noticed. He was deep into problem 17, a particularly challenging question involving differential equations. Something about the suggested solution pathway in the textbook felt unnecessarily convoluted. Marcus had been taught that elegant mathematics was often the most accurate, and this approach seemed anything but elegant. This doesn't make sense, he muttered, flipping back to review the chapter's fundamental theorems. He'd already solved the problem using his approach, but Mrs. Whitman would expect him to follow the textbook's method. As he compared the two, a discrepancy emerged. Marcus sat up straight, fatigue instantly forgotten. He reworked both solutions, step by step. His answer, 3.842. The textbook's method, 4.017. A small difference, but in calculus, precision was everything. I must have made a mistake, he whispered, but after the third recalculation yielded the same results, a different possibility surfaced, one that seemed both thrilling and terrifying. Could the textbook be wrong? Calculus, Advanced Principles and Applications, 6th edition, was the gold standard, used in prestigious universities nationwide. Written by Dr. Harrison Wheeler, a white-haired mathematician whose portrait adorned Westlake's mathematics department, it was considered infallible, especially by Mrs. Whitman, who frequently mentioned her friendship with the renowned author. For the next hour, Marcus dug deeper, tracing the discrepancy to a specific step in the textbook's approach to a particular class of differential equations. The error was subtle, a missing negative sign in one formula that cascaded through subsequent calculations, but it was definitely there. Dawn was breaking when Marcus finally stepped away from his desk, both exhilarated and terrified by his discovery. If he was right, and he'd checked his work dozens of times, this wasn't just about one homework problem. It affected an entire section of the textbook, potentially impacting students across the country. You haven't slept, his grandfather observed, appearing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Grandpa, I think I found something, Marcus explained, voice hushed as though the textbook might hear him. He walked Samuel through his discovery, the older man's eyes narrowing with concentration. After reviewing the work, Samuel let out a low whistle. "You've always had an eye for patterns others miss. Just like your mother." He paused, studying his grandson's troubled expression. "But you're worried about bringing this to Mrs. Whitman." Marcus nodded. "After yesterday, she'll think I'm just trying to cause trouble." "Maybe," Samuel agreed. "Or maybe this is exactly what needs to happen." "What do you mean?" "Some people only respect what they're forced to acknowledge." Samuel sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Your grandmother faced a similar situation at the hospital where she worked. Found a medication dosing error that no one wanted to hear about, especially from a black nurse. But she stood her ground because patient lives were at stake." "This is just math, Grandpa. Not life or death. Knowledge is never just anything, son. If this textbook is teaching thousands of students the wrong approach, that matters." Samuel squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "The question is, are you willing to stand in your truth, even when it's uncomfortable?" Marcus stared at his calculations, mind racing. If he approached Mrs. Whitman privately, perhaps with humility rather than triumph, she might listen. But if she dismissed him again, in front of everyone? His thoughts were interrupted by a text from Zoe, ready to turn in the project. "Whitman's going to flip when she sees how perfect it is." Marcus typed back, "Actually, I found something weird. Can you meet before class?" "The thing about truth," Samuel said softly, "is that it remains true whether people accept it or not. Your job isn't to make Mrs. Whitman comfortable with it, just to present it as clearly and respectfully as you can." Marcus nodded slowly, gathering his papers. This wasn't about vindication or proving Mrs. Whitman wrong. It was about mathematical integrity, and perhaps about finding his voice in a system designed to silence it. "I need to check one more thing," he told his grandfather, reaching for his laptop to search for contact information for the mathematics department at the local university. If he was going to challenge one of the most widely used calculus textbooks in the country, he needed more than courage, he needed backup. Professor James Carter's office was unlike any academic space Marcus had ever seen. Framed photographs of NASA's black mathematicians lined one wall, while complex equations sprawled across a massive whiteboard on another. The air smelled of coffee and old books. "So, you believe you found an error in Wheeler's calculus text?" Professor Carter leaned forward, his interest piqued. At 45, he was one of the few black mathematics professors at Westridge University, known for his groundbreaking work in computational theory. Marcus nodded, sliding his meticulously organized notes across the desk. In Chapter 17, the approach to this class of differential equations. There's a sign error that affects multiple solutions. For 30 minutes, the professor reviewed Marcus's work in silence, occasionally murmuring to himself or jotting down notes. Marcus watched anxiously, fighting the urge to fill the silence with explanations. Finally, Professor Carter looked up, his expression serious. "You're right. I am." Marcus had been so prepared for dismissal that validation caught him off guard. "Absolutely. This is a significant error, subtle, but impactful." He tapped Marcus's calculations. "Your approach shows remarkable insight. How long have you been interested in differential equations?" "Since I was 14. My grandfather had these old engineering textbooks." Marcus trailed off, still processing the confirmation. Professor Carter smiled. "Your grandfather taught you well." He paused, studying Marcus. "So, what do you plan to do with this discovery?" Marcus explained the situation with Mrs. Whitman, careful to be factual rather than emotional about the classroom humiliation. "Ah," Professor Carter nodded knowingly. "I've encountered the Eleanor Whitmans of academia my entire career. People who believe authority equals infallibility." He leaned back. "This won't be easy, you know. Challenging both a respected textbook and a teacher who's invested in its correctness." "I know. That's why I wanted a second opinion before saying anything." "Smart move." Professor Carter pulled out a fresh piece of paper. Let's prepare your case properly. You'll need to present this clearly and irrefutably. For the next 2 hours, they refined Marcus's proof, anticipating potential counterarguments and organizing the presentation into logical steps. Remember, Professor Carter advised as Marcus prepared to leave, this isn't just about being right. It's about advancing mathematical understanding. Approach it with humility, not triumph. Yes, sir. Marcus hesitated at the door. Professor Carter. Mrs. Whitman mentioned that a representative from the publishing company is visiting our class tomorrow to discuss the textbook's next edition. Professor Carter raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Well, that certainly changes the dynamics. He scribbled something on a business card. My direct number. Call me tomorrow after your class. And Marcus? Whatever happens, carry yourself with dignity. Your intellect speaks for itself. Walking home, Marcus felt both dread and determination battling in his stomach. He'd gone from wanting to hide his discovery to preparing to present it not just to Mrs. Whitman, but potentially to someone from the publishing company itself. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. How'd it go with the professor? He confirmed it. The textbook is wrong. Her response came immediately, OMG. What are you going to do? Marcus stared at the question for a long moment before typing, the right thing. That night, Marcus practiced his explanation until the words flowed naturally. His grandfather watched from the doorway, pride evident in his eyes. Ready for tomorrow? Samuel asked. Marcus took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school 30 minutes early, his presentation materials neatly organized in a folder. If he could speak with Mrs. Whitman privately before class, perhaps he could avoid a public confrontation. He found her in the faculty lounge, reviewing notes with a cup of tea at her elbow. Mrs. Whitman. May I speak with you for a moment? Marcus kept his voice respectful, remembering Professor Carter's advice about humility. She glanced up, her expression cooling immediately. Mr. Johnson. Class doesn't begin for another 20 minutes. I know. That's why I wanted to catch you beforehand. It's about the Chapter 17 assignment. Mrs. Whitman sighed, setting down her pen with deliberate slowness. If this is about your alternative approach, I believe I made my position quite clear. It's not exactly that, Marcus began, opening his folder. While working through the problems, I discovered what appears to be an inconsistency in the textbook itself. An inconsistency. Her tone was flat, disbelieving. In Dr. Wheeler's textbook. Yes, ma'am. In the section on differential equations, there's a negative sign missing from equation 17.4, which affects subsequent calculations. He slid his paper forward. I've worked through it multiple ways, and Professor Carter at Westridge University has confirmed. Professor Carter. Mrs. Whitman's eyebrows rose sharply. You took this outside our school? I wanted to verify my findings before bringing them to you, Marcus explained, his carefully rehearsed words rushing together. Mrs. Whitman stood abruptly, gathering her materials. Mr. Johnson, I find it highly inappropriate that you would question a nationally recognized textbook and then seek outside validation rather than discussing your concerns with me first. I tried to explain my approach yesterday, but that will be enough. She cut him off with a raised hand. Dr. Wheeler has been writing these textbooks for 30 years. I've known him personally for 20. The notion that a high school student, even a promising one, has found an error that generations of mathematicians have somehow missed is, frankly, presumptuous. Marcus felt his confidence wavering but remembered his grandfather's words. With respect, Mrs. Whitman, mathematics isn't about authority or experience. It's about what's provably correct. Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps, or irritation at his persistence. We'll continue this discussion another time. I need to prepare for our guest today. She turned away, effectively dismissing him. When class began, Marcus noticed an unfamiliar figure sitting at the back, a woman in her 40s with curly black hair and stylish glasses, typing occasionally on a sleek laptop. Mrs. Whitman confirmed his suspicion during her introduction. "We're honored to have Dr. Elena Lopez from Mathematical Horizons Publishing joining us today. She's gathering feedback for the 7th edition of our textbook." Dr. Lopez smiled warmly at the class. "I'm particularly interested in how these advanced concepts translate to the classroom. Please pretend I'm not even here." As Mrs. Whitman began reviewing Chapter 17, Marcus felt his heart pounding. Should he speak up now, with Dr. Lopez present? Or would challenging the textbook in front of a publishing representative only antagonize Mrs. Whitman further? The class moved through problem after problem. When they reached the section containing the error, Mrs. Whitman worked through the sample solution exactly as printed in the book, arriving at the incorrect answer. No one seemed to notice, except Marcus, who found himself gripping his pencil so tightly it nearly snapped. "Any questions before we move on?" Mrs. Whitman asked, her gaze skimming past Marcus. Zoe nudged him gently. "Now or never," she whispered. Marcus took a deep breath and raised his hand. Mrs. Whitman's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, Mr. Johnson. I believe there might be an error in that solution," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The classroom fell silent. From the back, Dr. Lopez looked up from her laptop, suddenly alert. Mrs. Whitman's chalk paused on the board. "An error in my calculation." "No, ma'am," Marcus clarified. "In the textbook's formula itself." The silence that followed felt eternal. 23 pairs of eyes darted between Marcus and Mrs. Whitman, while Dr. Lopez closed her laptop, giving the exchange her full attention. "Perhaps you'd like to elaborate, Mr. Johnson," Mrs. Whitman finally said, her voice dangerously pleasant. Marcus rose, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the board, but his voice remained steady. "The issue is in equation 17.4, he began, writing it exactly as it appeared in the textbook. "The formula is missing a negative sign here." He pointed to the specific term. "When this equation is applied to certain types of problems, like the one we just solved, it produces an incorrect result." Mrs. Whitman's skepticism was palpable. "And you believe you've discovered an error that has somehow escaped notice through 6 editions?" "I don't think it's that uncommon," Marcus replied carefully. "Mathematics is built on constantly refining our understanding." "Show us," came a voice from the back. Dr. Lopez had moved to a closer seat, her expression one of genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. With Dr. Lopez's encouragement, Marcus walked through his discovery step by step, demonstrating how the textbook's approach yielded different results from a correct solution. He worked methodically, just as he had practiced with Professor Carter, explaining each step clearly. "If we apply this formula as written, we get 4.017, he concluded, circling the answer. "But if we correct the sign error, we get 3.842, which can be verified using alternative methods." As he finished, an uncomfortable murmur rippled through the classroom. Tyler raised his hand immediately. "Mrs. Whitman, he must have made a mistake. The textbook can't be wrong." "Actually," Dr. Lopez interjected before Mrs. Whitman could respond, "textbooks contain errors more often than you might think. That's why we release new editions." She approached the board, examining Marcus's work. "This is quite interesting. May I ask your name?" "Marcus Johnson, ma'am." Mrs. Whitman stepped forward, her composure slightly fractured. "While Mr. Johnson's enthusiasm is commendable, I think we should verify this before jumping to conclusions about errors in Dr. Wheeler's work." "Of course," Dr. Lopez agreed, turning to Marcus. "Would you mind if I take a copy of your work? I'd like to have our editorial team review it." "I have it right here," Marcus replied, retrieving his folder and handing her his neatly prepared documentation, including Professor Carter's annotations. Mrs. Whitman's eyes narrowed at the university letterhead on some of the notes. "You've been in contact with Westridge University about this?" Before Marcus could answer, the classroom door opened, and Professor Carter himself appeared. "Forgive the interruption," he said, nodding respectfully to Mrs. Whitman. "I believe Marcus mentioned I might stop by." The tension in the room shifted as Professor Carter introduced himself to Dr. Lopez, who seemed delighted by his presence. "Professor Carter. I've read your work on computational approaches to differential equations. What perfect timing, we're discussing a potential error in exactly that area." As they began comparing notes, Mrs. Whitman's face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. The classroom dynamic had shifted dramatically, her authority no longer absolute as two mathematics experts validated what she had dismissed. "Mrs. Whitman," Marcus said quietly, away from the others, "I wasn't trying to undermine you. I just thought this was important to correct." She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on Professor Carter and Dr. Lopez as they animatedly discussed the implications of the error, occasionally nodding in Marcus's direction. The bell rang, but nobody moved, the usual rush to the next class forgotten in the drama unfolding before them. Principal Harrington's office had never felt so crowded. Marcus sat between Professor Carter and his grandfather, facing Mrs. Whitman, Dr. Lopez, and the principal across the broad mahogany desk. The wall clock ticked loudly in the tense silence. "Let me make sure I understand the situation," Principal Harrington began, folding his hands. "Marcus has identified a mathematical error in our calculus textbook, which Dr. Lopez and Professor Carter have now verified independently." "That's correct," Dr. Lopez confirmed, her excitement barely contained. "It's a subtle but significant error that affects a whole class of differential equations. We've already notified our editorial team and Dr. Wheeler himself." Mrs. Whitman sat rigidly in her chair, lips pressed into a thin line. She hadn't spoken since the meeting began. "And Dr. Wheeler's response?" Principal Harrington inquired. "He was initially skeptical, of course," Dr. Lopez said with a small smile. "But after reviewing Marcus's work and Professor Carter's verification, he acknowledged the error. He was quite impressed, actually, and asked to speak with Marcus personally." Samuel Johnson placed a supportive hand on his grandson's shoulder, pride radiating from his weathered face. "This is certainly an extraordinary situation," Principal Harrington mused, turning to Marcus. "I must say, I'm impressed by your mathematical acumen and your persistence in bringing this to light." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied quietly, still processing the validation after days of doubt. "Mrs. Whitman," the principal continued, "as Marcus's teacher, you must be proud of his achievement." All eyes turned to Mrs. Whitman, whose expression remained unreadable. "The pursuit of mathematical accuracy is always commendable," she finally said, her tone carefully neutral. Professor Carter cleared his throat. "If I may, I believe this represents a valuable learning opportunity for everyone involved. Mathematics thrives on verification and correction, it's how the discipline advances." "Indeed," Dr. Lopez agreed enthusiastically. "In fact, I'd like to offer Marcus a formal acknowledgement in the next edition. We'll credit him with identifying the correction." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Really? Thank you." Furthermore, Dr. Lopez continued, Mathematical Horizons has a summer internship program for promising students. I'd like to officially extend an invitation to Marcus to join us after graduation." Samuel squeezed Marcus's shoulder, while Professor Carter beamed beside them. "This is a tremendous honor," Principal Harrington declared. "And a proud moment for Westlake Preparatory Academy." "If I may," Marcus spoke up, finding his voice. "I'd like to acknowledge Professor Carter's guidance. I wouldn't have had the confidence to pursue this without his support." Professor Carter nodded appreciatively. "The confidence was already there, Marcus. I just helped you channel it." As the meeting concluded, everyone rose to leave, but Principal Harrington asked Mrs. Whitman to remain behind. Marcus caught a glimpse of her face as he left, a complex mixture of emotions he couldn't quite decipher. In the hallway, news had already spread. Students whispered as Marcus passed, their expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. Tyler stood with his friends, unusually silent, while Zoe rushed forward to get a first-hand account. "The entire school's talking about it," she gushed. Marcus Johnson, mathematician extraordinaire, takes down a national textbook. I didn't take down anything, Marcus protested, embarrassed by the attention. I just found an error that needed correction. An error that expert mathematicians missed for years, his grandfather reminded him. Own your achievement, son. It's significant. As they walked toward the exit, Dr. Lopez caught up with them. Marcus, Dr. Wheeler would like to speak with you tomorrow, a video call from his office at MIT. Would that be possible? Marcus's heart leaped. MIT, his dream school. Yes, absolutely. Excellent. Oh, and one more thing. She handed him her business card. We mean it about the internship. You have a remarkable mind for mathematics. We'd be lucky to have you. As Dr. Lopez walked away, Marcus stared at the card in his hand, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. What had begun as a late-night discovery had transformed into a potential stepping stone toward his future. Grandpa, he whispered, is this really happening? Samuel's eyes shone with unshed tears. This is just the beginning, Marcus. Just the beginning. The call with Dr. Harrison Wheeler lasted nearly an hour. The renowned mathematician, speaking from his book-lined office at MIT, treated Marcus like a colleague rather than a student, diving deep into the implications of the correction. Your approach demonstrates remarkable intuition, Dr. Wheeler concluded. We need more minds like yours in the field. Have you considered where you'll pursue your undergraduate studies? MIT is my first choice, sir, Marcus admitted, trying to contain his excitement. Dr. Wheeler nodded approvingly. Your application will certainly have my attention. The admissions committee appreciates students who don't just absorb mathematics but actively engage with it. When the call ended, Marcus sat in stunned silence. His grandfather, who had been listening nearby, approached with coffee. Sounds like you've made quite an impression, Samuel said, sliding a mug toward him. He talked to me like I belonged in that world, Marcus replied, still processing. Because you do. Samuel's tone left no room for doubt. At school, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Teachers who had barely noticed Marcus before now stopped him in hallways to congratulate him. Fellow students regarded him with a newfound respect, and even Tyler's group had ceased their mockery. Only Mrs. Whitman remained distant. Their interactions in class had become strictly professional, neither hostile nor warm. She called on Marcus less frequently, but when she did, she listened to his responses with careful attention. 3 days after the meeting with Principal Harrington, Marcus arrived at calculus class to find a substitute teacher. Mrs. Whitman will be out today, the substitute announced, distributing a worksheet. She's left detailed instructions. After class, Principal Harrington called Marcus to his office, where he found Professor Carter waiting. Is everything okay? Marcus asked, suddenly concerned. Yes, but there are some developments I thought you should hear in person, Professor Carter explained. Mrs. Whitman has requested a temporary leave of absence. Because of me? Marcus felt a pang of guilt despite everything that had happened. Principal Harrington shook his head. Mrs. Whitman has been teaching the same way for nearly 3 decades. I believe she's taking some time to reassess her approach. The situation has prompted some important conversations within our mathematics department as well, Professor Carter added. About teaching methodologies, authority in the classroom, and recognizing diverse approaches to problem solving. We're actually hoping you might assist with something, the principal continued. Many students are struggling with the implications of the textbook correction. Would you be willing to lead a special study session to help clarify the concepts? Marcus hesitated. Me? Teaching other students? Who better? Professor Carter smiled. You understand both the error and the correction intimately. That Friday afternoon, Marcus found himself facing a classroom of 20 students, including Tyler Reynolds, all voluntarily attending his study session. With a carefully prepared presentation and Professor Carter observing supportively from the back, Marcus began explaining the textbook error and its correction. To his surprise, the students engaged enthusiastically, asking questions and working through examples. Even Tyler participated, albeit quietly. The key insight, Marcus explained, approaching the complex material with patience, is understanding when a negative sign is mathematically necessary based on the underlying principles, not just following formula by rote. As the session progressed, Marcus discovered something unexpected: he enjoyed teaching. There was satisfaction in helping others grasp difficult concepts, in seeing understanding dawn in their expressions. Afterward, Professor Carter approached him with a smile. "You have a gift for this. Have you considered teaching as a career path alongside research?" "I hadn't," Marcus admitted, "but it felt right." As they gathered their materials, Tyler lingered behind. When Professor Carter stepped out, he approached Marcus awkwardly. "That explanation about the derivative transformation, it finally made sense the way you described it," he said, avoiding direct eye contact. "I've been struggling with that all semester." "Glad it helped," Marcus replied, surprised by the interaction. Tyler seemed to wrestle with something before finally adding, "What happened in class that day, with Mrs. Whitman? It wasn't cool. Just wanted to say that." Without waiting for a response, he hurried out, leaving Marcus to process this unexpected turn of events. That evening, checking his email, Marcus found a message from Mrs. Whitman. His finger hovered over it for several seconds before he found the courage to open it. Mrs. Whitman's email was brief but direct. "Mr. Johnson, if you're amenable, I would appreciate meeting with you tomorrow after school. There are matters I believe we should discuss. E. Whitman." Marcus read it multiple times, searching for clues to her intention. Was this a reconciliation, a confrontation, or something else entirely? After consulting with his grandfather and Professor Carter, he decided to attend. The following afternoon, he found Mrs. Whitman in her classroom, the space unusually quiet without the buzz of students. She looked different somehow, less imposing, perhaps, or simply more human. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," she said, using his first name for perhaps the first time. She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Mrs. Whitman spoke again. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice steady but softer than her usual classroom tone. "My treatment of you was unprofessional and unjust." Marcus shifted in his chair, unprepared for her directness. "You brought a valuable correction to light, and instead of engaging with your discovery, I dismissed it. Worse, I used my position to undermine your confidence and credibility." She met his eyes directly. "That was wrong of me, both as an educator and as a person." "Thank you for saying that," Marcus replied quietly. "I appreciate the apology." Mrs. Whitman nodded, then rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the school grounds. "Do you know why I became a mathematics teacher, Marcus?" The question caught him off guard. "No, ma'am." "Because mathematics represented certainty in an uncertain world. Clear right and wrong answers. No ambiguity." She turned back to face him. "I've taken pride in my precision, my expertise, my authority." She returned to her desk, opening a drawer and removing a weathered journal. "I've been reflecting during my leave. Reading my teaching journals from 30 years ago, when I first started. I had such different ideas then about what made a good teacher." "What changed?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Success, ironically." A rueful smile crossed her face. "As my reputation grew, so did my rigidity. I became so invested in being right that I forgot the essential joy of mathematics, the exploration, the discovery, the collaborative search for truth." She opened the journal, revealing pages of enthusiastic notes and ideas. "I was once excited about different approaches to problems. I encouraged students to find their own paths through difficult concepts." She closed it with a sigh. "Somewhere along the way, I started valuing conformity over creativity." Marcus nodded, understanding dawning. "You know, my grandfather says that true expertise isn't about knowing all the answers, but about asking better questions. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. Mrs. Whitman studied him thoughtfully. Principal Harrington tells me your study session was quite successful. It was interesting, Marcus admitted. Different, being on the other side of the classroom. You have a natural talent for it. She hesitated, then continued. I've been developing a proposal for a new advanced mathematics seminar next semester, one that focuses on creative problem-solving approaches. I'm wondering if you might be interested in serving as a student teaching assistant. Marcus blinked in surprise. Me? You'd work with me to develop materials and occasionally lead discussions, she explained. It would be a paid position, an excellent experience for your college applications. The offer was so unexpected that Marcus needed a moment to process it. That's very generous. May I ask why? Mrs. Whitman's expression softened further. Because you reminded me of something important, Marcus. The best mathematics isn't about authority, it's about truth. And truth can come from unexpected sources. She extended her hand across the desk. I can't undo how I treated you. But I can learn from it, and perhaps we can create something valuable together. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus shook her hand. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, the humiliation he'd experienced couldn't be erased so easily, but it was a step towards something new. As they began discussing the seminar concept, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, Marcus realized that mathematics had brought him full circle, from humiliation to validation to this unexpected collaboration. Later, walking home with his grandfather, Marcus recounted the conversation. Sounds like Mrs. Whitman is doing some serious soul-searching, Samuel observed. It's strange, Marcus admitted. A month ago, I was just trying to survive her class. Now we're planning a seminar together. That's how change happens, son, rarely in the ways we expect. Samuel placed an arm around his grandson's shoulders. Your grandmother used to say that true growth happens at the edges of our comfort zones. Seems like Mrs. Whitman found her edge. Maybe we both did, Marcus reflected, thinking about his journey from the back of the classroom to the front. That evening, as Marcus updated his college application essays to include his recent experiences, an email notification appeared from MIT admissions. The subject line read, "Your application status update." With trembling fingers, he clicked to open it. 3 months later, Marcus stood at the podium in Westlake Preparatory Academy's auditorium, adjusting his graduation cap as he prepared to deliver his valedictorian speech. In the audience, his grandfather sat in the front row, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. Professor Carter and Dr. Lopez were there too, having become mentors and advocates during the whirlwind months following his textbook discovery. The MIT acceptance letter had arrived that night in Chapter 9, along with a prestigious full scholarship. Dr. Wheeler had personally called to congratulate him, mentioning that he looked forward to having Marcus in his advanced seminar the following year. But perhaps most surprising was the transformation in Mrs. Whitman. After her initial apology, she had returned to teaching with a noticeably different approach. The rigid classroom hierarchy had given way to collaborative problem-solving and appreciation for diverse mathematical perspectives. She and Marcus had worked closely on the advanced mathematics seminar, where students were encouraged to question, explore, and even challenge traditional methodologies. Fellow graduates, esteemed faculty, family, and friends, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nerves. When I arrived at Westlake 4 years ago, I believed that success meant having all the right answers. Today, I stand before you knowing that it's actually about asking the right questions. His gaze swept across the audience, pausing briefly on his grandfather, whose proud smile carried the spirit of generations before him who never had such opportunities. Mathematics taught me that truth doesn't care about authority, tradition, or expectations. It simply is. Our job is to seek it, recognize it, and respect it, wherever we find it. In the second row, Mrs. Whitman nodded slightly, a gesture not of condescension but of genuine agreement. The greatest lesson I've learned isn't found in any textbook, Marcus continued. It's that growth happens at the edges of our comfort zones, when we have the courage to question what we think we know, and the humility to accept when we're wrong. As he concluded his speech to thunderous applause, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. What had begun as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a catalyst for change, not just for him, but for an entire educational community. At the reception afterward, Mrs. Whitman approached him, mathematics textbook in hand. The advance copy of the 7th edition, she explained, opening to the acknowledgments page where Marcus's name appeared prominently. Dr. Wheeler asked me to give this to you personally. Thank you, Marcus said, tracing his finger over his printed name. I should be thanking you, she replied with uncharacteristic warmth. You've made me a better teacher. As Mrs. Whitman moved away to speak with other graduates, Marcus's grandfather joined him. Proud doesn't begin to cover it, Samuel said, wrapping an arm around his grandson's shoulders. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Grandpa. That's not true, Samuel countered gently. You found your voice all on your own. I just reminded you to use it. As the afternoon faded into evening, Marcus stood at the edge of the celebration, MIT acceptance letter in one pocket, textbook acknowledgement in the other, looking toward a future bright with possibility, a future he had helped shape by having the courage to stand in his truth. Dear friend, this story reminds us that true education means questioning, not just accepting. In classrooms everywhere, brilliant minds from all backgrounds have their potential dimmed by bias and rigid authority. When we champion diverse voices and approaches, everyone benefits from the discovery of deeper truths. Education should elevate all students, regardless of race or background. Did this story move you? Hit the like button to help it reach others who need this message of perseverance and truth. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that challenge assumptions and inspire change. Together, let's create a world where talent is recognized, regardless of where it comes from.